Today, I'm going to talk to you about three countries that you might have written off for good, but perhaps shouldn't have, because here's what I see people doing repeatedly. Some bad news happens in their country. Freedoms were taken away, taxes increased, their candidate didn't win. They freak out, they're searching for solutions, they want to leave the country, and then the dust settles and all is fine. Meanwhile, even the smallest thing happens in another country and suddenly it becomes hard pass. Today, I'm going to share with you three countries that you might have thought were a hard pass and show you some evidence on two different fronts where they perhaps should be on your list and make a greater point that you should take away from this. I've told you for years, go where you're treated best. People like the idea in theory, and yet often we present all sorts of alternatives all around the world, and they often try and find one thing wrong with each of them so they don't have to make a move. I'm Andrew Henderson, the author of this now classic book. Do me a favor, if you'd leave a comment below. If you want us to talk more about emerging markets, write more emerging markets. If you want us to talk more about developed markets like the European Union, write less emerging markets so we can take your feedback into account. And if you'd like our help lowering your taxes, protecting your assets, and getting a second passport, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Let me tell you what I've seen firsthand for the last dozen or so years with clients, with people who come to our live event. People come and they love the idea of go where you're treated best. And then their candidate loses, or something bad happens in their country. A big one that I remember is the trucker protest in Canada. Lots of people came to us looking for help. Canadians are one of our biggest client bases, but we had a huge surge in Canadians after the trucker protests. Most of that extra surge never actually followed through on anything. Most of them never even bought any services, and I imagine most of them never did anything because they were really freaked out, and then eventually, Canada's still the greatest country in the world. Eventually we'll vote the right guy in. My belief here is you're not going to vote the right guy in. And so let me talk to you about two ways that we need to get away from this system where we're comfortable with the problems in our country, but one tiny inconvenience somewhere else freaks us out and we write it off. The first thing is personal freedom. We're not going to talk about this today, but personal freedom. People here, El Salvador or Georgia or, somewhere had some new law passed that the Western media presents in a very dire way. And they freak out. Hey, the place is gone, write it off. Yet another place that I can't possibly move to go where I'm treated best. The president of El Salvador made a great point. When people in Paris are burning the city down, nobody says a word. No one says France isn't a good place to go anymore. But when, one guy throws a stone in El Salvador, the whole place is rotten to the core. Get rid of it. So this manifests itself in two different ways. One is on personal freedom. If you want to hear us talk more about that, leave a comment. Personal freedom. This is basically where a country passes one law that the Western media maligns. You may not even understand exactly what's happening. Somehow, the city of Paris is burning to the ground. France is still great. One guy throws a stone in San Salvador and El Salvador is crumbling. People often look at it that way. But I want to look today at countries that perhaps you've overlooked from a financial lens, countries that people have told me directly, hey, that's not the place anymore, because they've seen one event happen. And I want to look at this through the lens of the stock market. And this is not investment advice, but let's take a look at a stock that we've talked about here before on the Mexican stock market. It's Banorte. They call themselves the strong bank in Mexico. And if you look at the chart back last May into early June, the stock took a tumble. What happened then? The election of Claudia Sheinbaum as president. This was one of those situations where someone gets elected, everybody freaks out. Well, what happened? We see the stock rallied and then dropped again as she got into office, and it kind of bumbled around. It was up in the high 180s pesos, bumbled around in the 130s, the 140s, had an occasional rally. Trump got elected. He thought that would have banged up Mexico. It did dent the peso a little bit. I think they pretty much gained all that back against the dollar as the dollar sags now. Trump got elected, rally dropped back down to fresh lows, and it's bumbled around until this year it's taken off like a rocket. And so if you look at the chart for about the last year, from what I'm sitting here, stock's up about 2%. Now, you can compare that to Bank of America in the United States. You can say, well, hey, why are you so against the United States? Bank of America is up over 9%. So there's about an 8% delta. I would argue that when you add in the much higher dividend Banorte pays, you're much closer to even on those two stocks. You get currency diversification. You could potentially get asset diversification. There's a lot of diversification benefits from owning assets in foreign countries. But I'm much more bullish on the future of Mexico in the next 20 years. But more importantly, whether you believe in the bullishness of Mexico or not, what you've seen is just as what will happen in the U.S. when Trump brings in tariffs, stocks go down, stocks come back up. COVID happens, stocks go down, stocks come back up. Different events happen in the world, stocks go down and go back up. When it happens in the stock market you're familiar with, when it happens in the country you're familiar with, well, that's just what happens. It's a buying opportunity. I treated the inauguration of Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, a lot of people wrote her off, as a buying opportunity. And so I'm not going to say I perfectly timed the bottom, because it is hard to be greedy when others are fearful. But I did take advantage of a buying opportunity because I believe in the long-term future of Mexico. And I think you want to look at the countries around the world somewhat like a stock. And you want to look at it from a very Warren Buffett-like value investor approach. Where is this stock going to be, not tomorrow, not next month, but where's this stock going to be in 10, 20, 30 years? If I'm getting a passport in a country, I'm taking a certain bet where that country is going to be. And I want to be a citizen of countries that are going to protect me in some way and at least be neutral, if not be getting better over time. A lot of Western passports, US, Canada, Australia, those passports and their countries are getting worse over time. And yet, if you live in one of those, you're not seeing the buying opportunity in these other places. How many people said when Claudia Sheinbaum got elected, Mexico's over, forget it, throw it to the wolves, gone? And yet, I think there's a greater sense of soft freedom in Mexico. I believe there's better economic opportunities, better tax situation in Mexico. And I think, from my perspective, I would rather own Banorte than Bank of America. You will decide from your own perspective. Let's talk about another country that had issues last summer. This one's done even better, and that's the country of Georgia. We've talked about it for many years. Lion Finance Group, they own Bank of Georgia, and they recently bought Ameria Bank in Armenia next door. This stock, when I first bought it, was trading at a PE ratio of under 3, and they were paying quite a healthy dividend. And the stock has almost doubled since I first bought it. Let's look at their 1-year chart. Actually, let's go back to the 5-year chart, and we'll see kind of what happened last summer. They had this kind of national security law. Now, we've had the former president of Georgia speak at Nomad Capitalist Live. I'm a fan of his. What I did tell him directly, though, was, I think that your position was too close with the United States. Now his party is out of power, and the people in power are less friendly to the United States. They are less friendly to Western interests. They want to chart their own course. Now, I'm not going to take a position that one way or the other, but the stock got up to an all-time high, and then this national security law rattled the West. I think people in the West, again, whether you like the national security law or not, people in the West got an inaccurate picture. I know Georgians who like it. I know Georgians who don't like it. I think they know more of what's happening than what you read about in the Telegraph or the New York Times. And so the stock tumbled on the wake of that about 30%, lost about a third of its value. Well, over time, people realized the sky didn't fall. You have a country that's moving in the right direction. It's becoming wealthier. They've got reasonable taxation. Overall, things may be not moving in the right direction as much as they used to be, but it's a country that I believe will do better over time. Hence why I own property there. I employ people there. I have investments there. And since that bottom, the stock has gone up about 78%, touching new all-time highs, to the point where it's now at a less attractive PE ratio of about 5.4, and the dividend's down to a much more reasonable dividend on the London Stock Exchange. So I got involved with what was then Bank of Georgia when it was very cheap, and I treated, hey, the West is selling off this stock, and they're selling off everything in the country. I treated that as a buying opportunity, and it's outperformed pretty much any other bank stock that I've looked at. Let's take a look at another company in Georgia that's sort of a holding company called Georgia Capital. A lot of their holdings are actually in Bank of Georgia, so that reflects the stock price. In the last year, it's up 86%. If you look at it year to date, it's up about 57%. And so they've also very nicely recovered from what happened when people freaked out about what was happening. So they tumbled when this national security law came in, about the same, 35%. My point is these countries are now back. They're bigger than ever. And how I invest is like Warren Buffett. I have a growth stock called Nomad Capitalist. I have assets that pay me cash that I can live on. If I'm going to go invest in something that's a sort of growth in income, which is kind of the meat of the portfolio, I want stuff that's going to do well 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. One of the things I've told you that we're going to be talking about a lot at Nomad Capitalist Live this year is Africa. Africa is a very emerging continent, of course. And yet there's some very interesting countries that you probably haven't heard much about. If I told you the Ivory Coast was on a lot of savvy investors' radar, you might say, I'm not going to invest in the Ivory Coast, until some country like that could become Singapore, and now they're charging you tens of millions of dollars in investment to live there. I think what we want to do is find the value opportunities, get in early, and then enjoy the ones that make it to Singapore level, enjoy the ones that make it to Malaysia level. Not all of them will get there. But to do that, we have to get away from this mindset of what's written in our local newspapers. You know, I'm guessing that the New York Times wants you to stay living in the United States. They probably don't look that kindly at people like me who move overseas because they want more freedom. They want to lower their taxes. They don't believe the country's heading in the right direction. For as much as they may criticize Trump, I'm sure they would equally criticize someone who left the country in search of better opportunities. They want you to stay. The London Telegraph, maybe more right-wing, they want you to stay. They'll talk about how the millionaires are leaving under Labor, but they want people to stay. You need to get out of that. You need to realize that Western media is not, even alternative media, you're not getting the full story. My belief, as someone who's recently sold off a lot of U.S. stocks, I'm sure the U.S. stock market will do okay. They're talking about substantially lower growth in U.S. and some other Western markets in the next decade. And that whole, kind of 11% S&P 500 number, people have suggested that will come down dramatically in the last decade. I don't know what'll happen. I do know that a lot of investors are looking anywhere but the USA, they say. That was in the Wall Street Journal recently. I do know that global stocks recently hit an all-time high, only if you remove the U.S. market. And so what I also know is what worked last year and a decade ago and 100 years ago isn't going to work anymore. And so here's one more for you. Brazil, with all the tariffs and the geopolitical issues with the U.S., China needs, for example, soybeans. They're not such friends with the U.S. right now. Who's filling the gap? Brazil. And so Brazilian stocks have been surging after being in the doldrums over the last year. They've been surging and things like that. Now, not everybody has access to Brazilian stocks, but there's an ETF, for example, EWZ. It's almost back to where it was a year ago. It fell out of bed. And now you're seeing Brazil becoming much more important as the U.S. loses soft power. And so if I look at all these things that are happening in terms of more multipolarity, with the U.S. alienating a lot of its allies and trade partners. You can like that, you can not like that, but when it comes to the decisions that you make for your money and the decisions they make for yourself, we have to look at the chart, as it were. And you're seeing a resurgence in the Georgias, the Mexicos, the Brazils, whether you like that or not. You ought to apply the same approach to where you're going to go and move your banking, where you're going to go and handle your asset protection, where you're going to have a residence permit, where you're going to have a citizenship. I want a citizenship that has a chart that looks like Lion Financial Group. And yet, if you look at the restrictions that have been imposed on the U.S. citizens in recent years, that passport is gradually getting a little bit worse. And so I think what we ought to do is take our ego out of it, realize our country is really, in some ways, no better than any other, and look at where are places trending up. Not on, hey, there's some news we all sold off on, but the long-term moving average is trending up. And I think you'll find a lot of the places that we talk about are doing that. We'd love to help you find those. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We help people move to tax-friendly countries. We help people set up asset protection structures. We help people get second passports. All things that you need to do. Why? So that your chart's moving average continues heading in the right direction. This is an 18th century palace in Lisbon, Portugal, and it's literally one of the most elegant fine dining restaurants anywhere in Europe. And I'm going to be showing you luxury living in Portugal here, and showing you penthouses and palaces for sale that you can live in with some of the best views of the city. And taking you to an exclusive members club that you can join, where old money and new money meet here in Lisbon. We're shopping for top brands along Lisbon's Fifth Avenue, visiting a catamaran in Lisbon's harbor to show you how you can buy a boat here, and meeting Michelin star chefs and drinking amazing Portuguese wine to show you the good life in Lisbon. This is how to live like a king.